Well, hello once again all my loyal YouTubers, and thanks once more for tuning in to my YouTube Classic Dirt Bike channel. Now, in previous videos on my channel we've covered all manner of iconic motocross machines, and quite a few of them have not been exactly household names. So I thought it's about time that we took a look at what is still regarded as one, if not the best open class motocross dirt bike ever built. We're of course talking about none other than the mighty 1981 490 Maico Mega 2. Now, this is a bike I've featured previously on my video channel, although this time round we hope to give you a little more background on the actual machine. Now, the bike of course is a 1981 490 Maico Mega 2, and this bike has undergone a slight transformation from its original specification. Now, our featured bike belongs to Scottish rider Robert Smith. Now, Robert undertook a full renovation of his 490 race bike while he was still recovering from a racing injury a few years ago. And as you can see, rather than rebuild the bike back to its original red and yellow Maico theme, Robert has opted to go for this full-on black and yellow motif with a hint of gold thrown in for good measure. But for me personally, I think this black and yellow and gold colour scheme works very well, and of course this is Robert's own rendition of what he wanted his renovated 490 to look like. Anyhow, when we talk about these 1981 490 Mega 2s, where do you actually start? Because these bikes are so iconic, and these machines have gained praise from motocross riders across the world. Such was its impact on the sport when it was introduced in 1981. But of course the Maico factory built some fantastic motocross race bikes during its existence, and this 1981 bike was the pinnacle of their achievements. Now, this fantastic 490 Maico motor maybe didn't have the finesse and engineering of a top-of-the-range Japanese designed engine, but nevertheless these motors were simply put together and engineered and worked absolutely superbly, developing loads of raw power. Now, these big 490s needed a big carburetor to feed them with the gas they needed, and these 40mm Bing carbs were not the most sophisticated on their day, but did their job superbly. And when that motor was on full song, the gas flowed through into that 490 cylinder like the proverbial waterfall. Now, of course, a 5-speed gearbox again, and if you were brave enough to kick that 490 into the elusive top gear with that throttle pinned back, then you were of course part of a very unique group of ballsy open class 490 racers. Now, the original 81 bikes would have had a piston port induction engine, although as you can see Robert's bike here has been upgraded to a reed valve induction system. But of course the reed valves helped that big engine develop its grunt more smoothly and stop the engine from gassing up, pulling out of slow corners. Now, the engines of course had a wet multi-plate clutch with those very unusual beveled washers as clutch springs. Now, the clutch was also connected, remember, to the crank by using a duplex primary chain, which could occasionally give you a bit of trouble if not checked on a regular basis. Now the 490s had a decent set of 42mm forks fitted to the big Maico and gave the rider about 12 inches of travel at the front end, which was about adequate for most of the world's racetracks. But then again, low pressure air could also be pumped in by adding or removing air through the Schrader valve on the top of each of the fork legs. Now Robert has added a pair of these non-standard rubber fork gaiters to help the stanchions from the ingress of dirt or damage. Now back in 1981, these 490s would have been fitted with a pair of Italian-made Corte Cosa shocks, which in my own personal opinion were only good enough to hold up the back of the bike while it was sitting in the showroom. So then almost all riders then threw these in the bin and fitted a better quality set of shocks, such as these top of the range Olins that Robert has fitted to his machine. Of course there are many other good makes of shocks about, but these Olins are about as good as they come. Now a plastic fuel tank of course on these 81 490s, and you could add about 2.5 gallons of pre-mixed fuel to these tanks, which was normally mixed at about 50 to 1 if I remember correctly. Now the big Maico was not the most fuel efficient off-road racer of its time, but then again they weren't meant to be, as this bike was all about giving you 100% brute power all of the time. But there was a decent driver's seat fitted to these 81 bikes, which of course had the air filter underneath that you could remove and then wash, then dry and re-oil it before refitting back into its plastic airbox. But as far as the seat goes, it was very adequate. That is of course once the big Maico got going, that you could keep your backside still on it. Now, during the refurbishment and upgrading of this 490, Robert has gone for a brand new pair of wheels on his new bike and fitted a pair of these high quality XL gold rims with their associated heavy duty stainless steel spokes, and a new pair of Dunlop Sports D952 tyres on the front and rear. Now the exhaust system on Robert's bike is of course naturally not the original, and many of these old 490s from 81 don't have their original exhausts anyway, but Robert's machine has a full DEP Derek Elwell pipes exhaust system and tailpipe, and we'll be able to have a little listen to what this bike actually sounds like through this exhaust tailpipe shortly nearer the end of the video. Although as I mentioned, many of these old 490s don't have their original exhaust systems, and these DEP systems are as good a replacement as you could possibly buy for this old bike. Now, one of the other improvements Robert's made to this bike is to fit this race base rubber chain guard that stops the chain from rubbing on the shock spring. Now, there are not many of these 81 bikes still sporting their original handlebars and other associated add-ons like their cables, grips and levers. But of course a decompressor is an absolute must on these 490s due to the high compression of the cylinder. And there is a certain knack to firing up one of these big 490s, but unless you know what you're doing, a decompressor is an absolute must on this bike. Now of course there are many outlets out there that will supply you with period correct replacement mudguards and side panel plastics for your 81 490, although these will more than likely be in your original Maico red colours. Now I'm not entirely sure if Robert here managed to pick up these ones in black, or if he's had the original red ones painted, but nevertheless I must admit they look the goods with those gold and yellow accessories added. Now of course there were a few subtle differences between the previous 1980 bike and this 81 machine when it came to the frame. Now the swing arm on the 81 490 is about 2 inches longer than the previous 80 bike, which increased the overall stability of the 81 490, and the front end also was dropped down slightly from the previous year's bike to help the bike to turn. Anyway, so whether you're a Maico diehard and like your 490s in the bog standard red livery rather than this black, or you think that this black and yellow theme with these gold wheels and gold rear shocks float your boat, then that's fine as well. Because for me, my personal opinion is that I think this is a fantastic interpretation of what Robert dreamed his eventual new project would look like. And although he hasn't went along with the stereotypical Maico red on his new restoration, he should be justifiably proud of what he's achieved here. So okay, we've looked and talked about Robert's very nice black 1981 490 Maico, and we've checked out some of its more interesting components. So let's get Robert to fire the bike up and let's all have a little listen to what she sounds like. Now you can just see on Robert's left hand there, he has his finger with the decompressor lever pulled in just to get that initial big 490 high compression engine turning over. This video was brought to you in association with WorldSport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more details.